Hi, we're kind of. Okay, we're gonna start the meeting. Welcome to the September 4th, 2024 meeting of the Thurston County Planning Commission. The Thurston County Planning Commission is a resident advisory committee of the Board of County Commissioners on land use planning matters such as the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance amendments. Planning Commission actions are in the form of recommendations to the county commissioners, final decision makers. All Planning Commission meetings are open to the public. Community members are welcome to observe all Planning Commission briefings and work sessions. Public comment is allowed on those topics for which a public hearing has not been held. And the rest of that script is for later. So we have an agenda, and we have a motion to approve, or do we have any amendments to the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we have an agenda. Second on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from August 21st. Has everyone had a chance to?
The meeting minutes have not been completed.
Okay.
Yeah.
I read some.
Right. Oh, wait. Oh,
It was-
never mind.
was it
I'm
the
sorry. I'm thinking
Previous
of the
month
previous
that weren't
one.
completed? Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
So do introductions at some point.
Oh.
We're talking about the one from the previous two.
We just approved the agenda with the introductions.
I skipped right over introductions. I apologize. Do you want to do that and then we'll talk about minutes? We'll start here to my left.
Kevin Pestinger, District 5.
I'm Eric Casino. I serve at large and live in the Lacey UGA.
Daniel Baumbarker, I live and serve for District 1.
Bill Fishburne, live and serve in District 4.
Scott Nelson, District 4. Barry Halverson, District 2.
Sandy Kaiser, I live and serve in District 3.
Joel Hanson, I serve District 3. Was trying to make sure we stay on time here. Skipped right over that. So back to meeting minutes of August 21st. Did we decide that those meeting minutes have been?
Those ones have been done. It's
Those
the
have been done?
prior one.
Okay.
They were sent on August 28th.
Great.
Motion to approve the meeting minutes and accept the audio as the official meeting record.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Next on the agenda is public comment, and I have a script to read, and we have a couple folks who signed up here in the boardroom, and I'm not sure about anyone online, but the Thurston County Planning Commission welcomes comments from the public at all meetings. General speaking guidelines, please introduce yourself, including the address you reside in the county. Please address the Planning Commission, not the audience or staff. The Planning Commission does not respond to public comments. Speakers are limited to a total of 3 minutes. The timer will show on the video screen to help keep track of time. Meeting attendees cannot donate their speaking time to another person. No comments that are lewd and offensive, inflammatory, hateful, defamatory, or discriminatory in nature. No comments that are commercial in nature. All materials provided to the county may be subject to release pursuant to the Public Records Act. Remarks on projects that have already had a public hearing are not permitted. Thank you for your cooperation. I know that Aiden was signed up, so if you want to start, and thank you very much.
We're there now, so.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Is there a microphone in the ceiling there?
You want me to just move it?
Yeah, best. We want to move things.
We know there's one right over here.
There's one right over here. Yeah, let's-
Usually is that green thing right there.
Best set.
I do want to clear up, because I think you mentioned earlier, Mr. Chair, that sort of prohibitions on commenting if something was at a public hearing beforehand. Does that apply to the housing draft that's up
No,
Okay.
that's
No,
not.
no.
I've always been a little confused about that. Okay, well, thank you, planning commission members. My name is Aiden Espino Jr. I'm here on behalf of South Puget Sound Habitat for Humanity, which is affordable home ownership developer in the county. So Habitat for Humanity is excited by the amazing work that this planning commission and staff have done to balance the requirements passed by the state legislature and the community needs in this housing draft. And overall, our major concern with removing a list that defined housing incentives in goal 1, objective 1C has been addressed, as in this draft, the list is re-added. So thank you. And the reason why that it was important to us is because we felt that one of the comprehensive plan is to sort of list objectives and goals and ideals. And we felt that it was it's additive to have a specified and defined list of incentives to promote affordable housing construction. So in this list includes expedited permitting, conditioned on provision of low to moderate income housing, bonus density with urban growth areas, fee waivers or exemptions, parking requirement reductions, et cetera, et cetera. And these are things that we have discussed and you have discussed as a commission, and we will likely continue discussing. So it's just good to sort of have that grounding we feel in that planning document. We do understand that, from allies that we work with in the community, that there may be concerns about the sort of rural, urban, new housing split and sort of passing the draft before what I understand is that the joint allocation of housing needs by economic segment and jurisdiction data related to that. I think we largely echo these concerns and understand there's a balance between moving the process along and meeting state requirement deadlines and other deadlines the county imposes, but we encourage to not rush if we don't have to. But appreciate the work that is being done and again just echo what you probably may hear from some of the partners here. So yeah, I look forward to working with you and thank you for what you do.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next on the list, I think this says Radcliffe Cushman. Please correct me if I got that wrong.
Oh, yes, but I'm making public comment.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. Welcome. And then we have Rhonda Larson Kramer.
Hi, thank you. My name is Rhonda Larson Kramer and I live at 1814 East Side Street Southeast. And my comments are that the draft housing chapter has some critical missing data. Specifically, it's missing the joint allocation of housing needs by economic segment and jurisdiction that you just heard about. We have been waiting for this data since spring. This chapter of the comprehensive plan is supposed to discuss plans about how to fill any gaps, but without the data, we still don't know if there are any gaps. The draft housing chapter is also missing needed policy statements. The draft does not include the sustainable Thurston goal of having not more than 5% of new housing built in rural areas. That goal needs to be in the comprehensive plan. Omitting it from the plan bypasses all the hard work of people who worked on sustainable Thurston. Regarding the goals that are in the draft, they have not been updated from the 2019 version. The affordable housing crisis requires us to create new goals and objectives and not rely on pre-existing language that has not helped solve the affordable housing problem so far. The draft also needs to mention the Regional Housing Council. The council was created in 2021 and it is doing good work. It's not mentioned in the text or in the goals. Again, this update is supposed to reflect our current conditions, not what the situation was in 2019. And then finally, the draft needs to have better narratives that connect the dots regarding the data. The data itself is mostly well presented and formatted. So it's just not explained enough in the narrative. Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you. And do we have anyone online who would like to address the Planning Commission tonight? Okay.
Farrell on the louders.
Okay. Phyllis Farrell, you're first up. Phyllis, are you there?
I am getting there.
Can hear
Thank you.
Thank you.
Evidently, the host has stopped my video.
Oh. We will see what we can do about that.
I think everyone joins.
I can go ahead if that's all right.
That'd be fine.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for your service and hard work on this housing draft. A couple comments that I'm really going to reiterate a previous comment that I would like to see you add a policy of the sustainable Thurston 5% growth goal for rural housing. I think that needs to be incorporated in there for the reasons previously stated. Also, I'd like to see a policy stated on with a partnership for the nonprofits for home ownership and maintenance for the low income population. And thirdly, I'd like to see consideration of a recommendation of increasing funding for subsidizing building and maintenance of affordable housing. Currently, it is not profitable or reasonable for developers to build. And it seems obvious that what we need is a government subsidy to build those low-income housing. The other thing that I wanted to ask about is a couple years ago, based on legislative requirements in a court case, we had the 5 WIRAs, or water resource inventory areas, spend a lot of time and money and effort that included volunteer representatives to develop water allocation plans that Ecology approved. How are those water WIRA plans being considered in housing allocations and in permitting? And on another subject, I guess, regarding the climate change element, developed by report by Cascadia Consulting. I thought the resilience and adaptation policies and requirements look comprehensive and good, but what I think is missing, or I didn't find it, were reports on metrics with how the greenhouse gas emission reductions are going to be accomplished. I would think a periodic report, it was this way in 2024 and in 2026, we've reduced or not reduced for those 72 actions that the county approved for the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan. So metrics, reportable metrics for the public to see, I think would be, and if they're there, I missed it, but that's what I noticed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. Who is next to speak? Looks like,
Betsy Norton.
okay, next Betsy Norton. You are being promoted to panelist and we should be able to hear you shortly.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. My name's Betsy Norton, 1405 Evergreen Park Drive, Southwest in Olympia. I would just like to comment mostly on, I'd like to suggest, and I submitted these as comments already online, but I'd like to suggest a goal regarding climate change and the environment and wildlife. I'd like to suggest that the county enable increased housing while also conserving wildlife habitat providing resident access to green and outdoor space, and providing resilience to climate change impacts through housing. I noticed that part of the housing recommendations was to, quote, streamline regulations, which means to me, usually they want to skip over some of the environmental concerns, and I think we need to go the opposite direction. So I have a few suggestions. I suggest that the county promote higher housing density that builds up, not out, with required conservation of a significant amount of property in return for allowing them to make denser units. All housing should meet LID stormwater standards to reduce the contamination and flooding of local habitat and to reduce damaging flooding during climate change storms. All housing should install heating and cooling systems which are energy efficient and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Housing should reduce impervious surface coverage and increase tree canopy. The county should include higher density housing in areas where there are some basic services available, like grocery stores, pharmacies, hospitals, schools, and public parks and libraries. I did a look of Grand Mound UGA, where is one of the areas where low-income housing is projected to be, and there aren't any of those things in nearby proximity. I mean, there's some schools there, but there are no parks, there are no groceries, there are no pharmacies. I would encourage the county to put higher density housing associated with additional traffic calming, sidewalks, and public transit upgrades as needed to ensure the residents can navigate the neighborhood and public transit safely. That would reduce greenhouse gases as well. And that housing should handle wastewater effectively, so it's sized and strengthened and operated effectively to protect the local and neighborhood environment from contamination of untreated wastewater through seepage, overflow, or mechanical failure. And that housing located in floodplains that now flood or are predicted to be underwater frequently or chronically due to increased storms or sea level rise by 2045, 2080, 2100, which the IG has forecast for. Anyway, you need to do something about that and thinking about moving those people out. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And is Loretta Sepinen the last one on the list? Okay, Loretta, you're being moved to a panelist, and we should be able to hear you soon.
For those not aware, this thing on your desk is from Loretta.
Oh, thanks.
The document that Betsy referenced where she made those suggestions.
Now can you hear me?
We can hear you now, Loretta.
Yeah, there's something wrong there. Loretta Sepinen, Olympia, Washington. I'm speaking to you, it started counting quite a few minutes ago, so I'm going to go over time for sure. I want to speak about housing. I want to be sure that you have at least one more meeting on housing. Don't give a thumbs up at this meeting. I found some very helpful things that were changed in this version of the chapter, and I wrote about them online. Now I want to focus on 4 things that are issues that are not well addressed. And some people have already spoken about a number of these. One is about housing supply, and it's not meeting demand at all. Even though the chapters are blank, we already know that for the county as a whole, there's 54,000 new units that are needed. There's only 80,000 more people going to be in the county. And so simple math, how many people live in each unit tells us that approximately 10,000 of those 54,000 units are for shortages that exist today, no population increases. So supply is not meeting demand now by a substantial amount. We need to say that in the report. Another issue is that most of that 10,000 units of shortage is for people under the 80% AMI. So it's lower income people. In the surveys that the county did and in the county outreach, affordable housing was one of the main things people talked about. So that needs to be listed in the report. Affordable housing is on people's minds. It needs to be identified as an issue for our community to address. The third is about funding streams, and this relates to that Regional Housing Council, which is really doing a good job of bringing together all the different streams, bringing together the city, the county, and very importantly, in partnership, not just additional people, but in partnership with the nonprofits, to allocate to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners an allocation of the funding stream money. And this chapter needs to describe that, and it needs to say that the money that already is existing is a trickle compared to the money that's going to be needed to do this. Last item is on the table 4.6. We can calculate from that one that 13% of all the net increase in housing in the last decade is from the rural areas, 13% in the rural areas. That's too much rural area housing, and the chapter needs to state that growth rate. It needs to be clear about it, not require that you have to calculate it on your own, and state as a policy that we want to make a difference by significantly dropping that 13% down to not more than 5%, and make that a clear policy statement. Thank you for continuing to work on this housing chapter.
Thank you, Loretta. Is there anyone else online who would like to address the Planning Commission? Okay, I don't see any hands. So next on our agenda, continued business, work session number 21 on the Thurston 2045 plan. And we have a work session on the housing outline.
Sorry, I was sending, well, a question. I have Betsy Norton's public comment that she referenced. I'm not sure if it got included in your packet. Would you like it sent to the whole planning commission just so you have it? Okay.
Please.
So that's what I was trying. Thank you all for being here. This isn't the last time we'll talk about housing. It's not the first time we'll talk about housing. But we are excited that we were able to get a draft chapter out to the community to start reviewing, as well as to the planning commission to start reviewing. With that, I'm interested in kicking it off and having Linda provide the presentation for tonight, and then of course hear the discussion of the planning commissioners. And I am joined by Rodriguez, who is the face here at Thurston County of the housing chapter. No pressure. No pressure. No. She's going to solve all the problems. We're counting on her.
All right. Sounds good.
She'll try. We know that.
Did it start?
You're good. We can hear you.
I could not turn my video on. It says the host does not allow me to, but I'm gonna share my screen. Hope you can see that. So let me just share this. So
We were having that problem earlier. Oh, yes, screen sharing is working.
okay, good. I think that's all people need. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and hello again. So we have been meeting on housing chapter for several times now, and we had brought in front of you an overview of what is required. We also brought in front of you some of the data analysis that we had done before, and also some of the goals and policies that were in work in progress. And this draft housing chapter is a combination of all of those, and we will take your input and great discussion from the public, great input from public as well. So what we would like to do today, I'm just gonna give you a brief overview. We have the chapter, draft housing chapter already. So this evening, I will summarize the housing element and then just to remind ourselves that this housing chapter is a completely new chapter. And our goal is to be consistent with the House Bill 1220 and the Growth Management Act, as well as the county's, the input that we received from public and the county's goals and mission. So this chapter, as you have already seen, it has several subsections. So the whole idea is that we identify the housing household characteristics, what the community is, what type of housing you have in the community, and what are the availability in terms of housing supply, and what are the needs and what needs to be done. So basically, that's the broad overview of the housing chapter. Under household characteristics, what we have identified as housing sizes and types, what type of house, single family or multifamily, one bedroom, multiple bedroom house. So we have identified those. And then also vacancy rate and then total housing units, those have been identified. We also looked at your home ownership and renter status. We find that significant number of elderly people have home ownership in the county, but renters constitute a significant share of the small family households in the county. Income level of renters and homeowners are below the area median income that the county has, and renter households have not significantly, but compared to the owner households, renter households have less income in terms of the area median income. That's below the area median income for renter households. Renters are household cost burden levels are higher for renters than owners, and there are severely cost burden households exist in the county. So you have seen that before. I'm gonna move to the next slide, but if you have any questions, I can just wait before I move to the next slide. Should I move on?
Please do.
Yeah.
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, and then this is another subsection about housing supply and affordability. So this subsection, we discuss the data and housing inventory, what type of housing types you have in the county and cities and the UGAs and rural areas. So we also identify that rural areas have a significant, an unincorporated county has a good portion of housing for the county. And then manufactured homes offer an affordable housing option for the county. And manufactured homes include standalone ADUs and then manufactured home community. And this map that you see, this shows the manufactured housing communities throughout the county, which the draft also identified about 81 registered manufactured housing communities in the county. In terms of housing affordability, ownership cost is higher, like I mentioned before, that to own a home, you have to have more income than the area median income. So that is a challenge. And then there is a shortage of rental housing, particularly at the 30% to 50% AMI level throughout the county. Existing affordable housings are not always available, even though there is shortage, and then the ones that are there, they're not always available. The county has subsidized housing, as some are located in the cities and some in the rural areas. Very few affordable housing providers are located in the rural parts of the county or in the Grand Mount UGA. We also looked at the production trends of housing. We find that the county's rural area, from the permit data, it shows that the county's rural area has detached single-family home and then manufactured home permits. Grand Mound area has single-family, multifamily, and then manufactured homes. I am now moving to the next slide. Emergency housing. So emergency housings, it provides temporary shelter for individuals and families that do not have access to permanent supportive housing. And the permanent supportive housing services provides long-term rental assistance. Both these housing types, they support the 0 to 30% AMI income bracket. And then also we looked at the county's homeless population. The number has increased, but overall the rate has been consistent. And there are homelessness throughout the county. And we also talked with the service providers about, so there is evidence that there are, within the rural area, there are manufactured homes, unpermitted manufactured homes. That indicates that there is need for housing and another form of homelessness are there within the county. Moving to the next slide. Racially disparate impact, exclusion, and displacement risk. This is a new section for this chapter. So what we do with this is that we identify racially disparate impacts in terms of household income, cost burden, and disparities in home ownership. It is debatable, though, that whether disparities are a result of the county's policies versus the overall economic system nationwide. So county's policies would definitely, improved policies would definitely help, but then there is a bigger reduction of supply, or I would say need of more housing nationwide, and then the financing opportunities. So there are some other factors that causes the racially disparate impact. So that's debatable whether one factor is only responsible for this or not. We look at the data, we look at the displacement risk in terms of this map that you see here. This is an index map that shows economic, cultural, and physical displacement. So these areas indicate multiple levels of factors that we look at. Social vulnerabilities, and sometimes displacement can happen due to market change. Property values go up so high, and sometimes cultural change as well. So this map is an index of all those displacement risks. I'm gonna move to the next slide. Projected housing needs, and this is something that we are hearing that TRPC is putting together. They have already put together a forecast for new housing units needed, and housing types by income level. This is also work in progress, but it's pretty close. The recommended method allocates that less than 2% of the housing needs will be within the rural areas, 0 to 120%, but there is capacity for higher income housing as well. So overall, the land capacity is a work in progress. We are reviewing and working on that data now. So you will be getting more updates in the CBO process. If Ashley or or Anna, if you want to add anything to it, please jump in.
Yeah,
Or-
and is it we could pause, because I know that this is an area where we've received public comment and we are close. And we did share this with TRPC to make sure it was okay to share publicly, and we shared it with the board this morning. But based on all of the work that's been done, and they're still finalizing numbers, but it's clear that less than 2% of the overall housing need in the 0 to 120% income brackets would be allocated to rural areas. The difficult thing here is that the state only requires us to allocate for those 0 to 120%. most of the capacity in the county in rural areas, the excess capacity exists in the above 120% income bracket. And so Sustainable Thurston, if you go back into that document, it does have some recommendations for how do you address excess capacity. We have a very parcelized rural area. It's already been broken into 5-acre lots. And so, you know, at this point, those are considered legal building lots. And so ways to address excess capacity really look at increasing the ability to conserve land. So by essentially the county buying up 5-acre lots, or using a pretty heavy regulatory mechanism to say, sorry, you need to have at least 4 of those 5-acre lots before you can build. So there aren't a lot of options, but in terms of the official allocation, recognizing all of the issues that you've brought up and the community's brought up, less than 2% of it will be allocated. And then the big question for the Planning Commission and the board is, do you want to do anything about the excess capacity that exists?
The majority of the land that would be relevant to most of the discussions we have.
I'm sorry?
It sounds like that the other that you just described is the majority of the land that we would actually be.
Is our RR15. The majority of the county is zoned RR15, and it was zoned that way in recognition of the fact that a lot of it's already in 5-acre parcels or smaller. So we went through an exercise actually when we were doing the long-term ag zoning update where we were trying to find creative mechanism like Whatcom County has for saying that, hey, if you've got a 20-acre parcel, like you'd essentially be required to go through a conservation subdivision. And we looked at where it could be applied here. Because in Whatcom County, they've got 30,000 acres that creative mechanism applies to. Here, it was, I don't recall the exact number, but it was like less than 2,000 acres. Just that comparison of what the parcelization looks like here. So I throw that out there, like full transparency, like what you'll end up seeing in the chapter for the allocations are like, well, hey, it's less than 2%, but that doesn't address the fact that we have excess capacity in our specifically in our R1 to 5 zone.
So that would be looking at ways to rezone those areas potentially?
That is a big policy decision, whether it's considered down zoning. I mean, that would be the more common way to look at it. And so whether that is something that the Planning Commission would want to recommend to the board to consider. But other than that, it's, you know, actively going out there and conserving land. So it's buying up 5-acre parcels, you know, through the HCP or through other conservation mechanisms. The other thing that Sustainable Thurston calls out is keeping up-to-date inventories of your environmentally sensitive areas, your prime forest land, your prime farmland, degraded riparian areas, and really targeting those areas for conservation. So, you know, we do have a grant-funded project to update our land conservation incentive programs. But I just say all this so that you can noodle on like what TRPC has found in doing the land capacity analysis is that the cities have done actually a pretty good job of following through on the zoning changes necessary to accommodate diverse housing types in urban areas. But that doesn't deal with the excess capacity in the county. They can upzone as much as they want in the city, but then excess capacity will still exist in the county for housing.
And that's always gonna be a risk. The bigger and denser the cities get, the more attractive the cities are, the more attractive suburbanization is.
Well, suburbanization is only gonna happen in the UGAs. So it's not, so those 5-acre parcels, they're protected pretty much in that 5-acre size. So you can't further divide them in the RR15 zone. You will see more development in the UGAs. That's where a lot of the capacity exists.
I had a follow-up question about the UGAs.
Oh, can we go to Commissioner Casino?
Yeah,
Talk back? Okay.
So is the largest concern about developing these 5-acre lots in the above 120% AMI a loss of rural character? Or is it the biggest concerns, the environmental impacts of 5-acre estates all over the county? Or where are we hearing the biggest concerns about these 5-acre estates being built up everywhere?
Say both. I mean, on both fronts. On the environmental impacts, water availability impact side, I mean, those are things that you can study and you could use modeling to try to figure out what those longer term impacts are. And we have introduced a lot of those ideas into the implementation plan because we know water availability is a concern. So those are things where it's like, yes, if that is where the concern lies, you could put in place more checks and balances for like long-term monitoring, long-term adaptive management. It's rural character. I don't really know how to put my arms around that in terms of like monitoring, like when have we tipped the scale of having too many 5-acre, estates?
I guess
So-
my concern is that if we go through and we change the rules on people about what they can do with their 5-acre parcels, a lot of people have 5-acre parcels and they treat them like their 401ks and long-term retirement plans. And if we go through and we take that away from them by downzoning them, I have very big concerns about that. I think if we are going to discourage build out of these 5-acre estates, which I admittedly don't like, I think that they're environmental disasters. I think that the way that we need to do that is by looking at the real cost of these developments through impact fees. And I think that the urbanized areas of the county are subsidizing the unincorporated areas of the county when they are not footing their own bills for infrastructure. The infrastructure to serve a lot of these rural areas is very expensive, and I don't think that these buildings are actually covering that in most cases. So if we're going to discourage it, I would rather do it by them paying their true costs of infrastructure to develop these lots
Like the
over,
5-acre
Yeah.
parcel.
over downsizing and taking away their ability altogether.
And there are a lot of tools in the toolbox. I will say downzoning it's a hammer.
Yeah, it's one that ideologically I could not get behind downzoning. I think that would be stealing from people that were planning for something else. It's changing the rules on the mid-game, and so I would have a very difficult time with that.
I think there may be unintended consequences as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I brought up downzoning mostly because I know there's a lot of concerns about the cost of some of the procedures that we're taking, and that would be one way to do it relatively cheaply. It's not necessarily something I'm particularly a fan of because I don't think we have the zone that would make it effective to use these for, if we were trying to downzone for the purpose of conservation. I don't think we have really good zoning for that purpose at this point, so. It's not my favorite, but I wanted to bring it up as something that is in some ways, it's certainly cheaper than buying the property directly. I do find interest in the idea of Commissioner Casino's like fee structure, but I think there are a variety of tools we can pursue.
We also, sorry, just really, in addition to, there are protections in place. The water availability one is one that we're still studying, but the critical areas ordinance plays into this. The habitat conservation program plays into this. So there are other layers that, imagine you have a 5-acre parcel. The Development Services Group is developing a map right now that just overlays all the critical areas and, like 3 basic colors, like you totally in the clear. I don't know if there are any parcels left that are totally in the clear. And then, how many critical areas do you have? And it's a gradation. There aren't really a lot of parcels left that don't have some kind of environmental protection on them. But that's another tool in the toolbox, is to realize that these things layer on top of each other.
And our innovative techniques zoning is really, yes, if you have 5 acres, you've got 5 acres, you've got a parcel, you can probably build there. But just because you have 20 acres does not mean you can build 4 houses on it.
Yeah.
Because of that. And I'm curious if we have excess capacity, what do we think it is now? Because I'm pretty sure that the last time TRPC did a report, it was like 14%.
It is, so you're gonna see, I'm struggling with this and our team is struggling with this. Different chapters of the draft comp plan are gonna have different numbers in it. So the land use chapter, which is tied to the buildable lands analysis, which doesn't take into consideration housing types or anything like that, just looks at capacity. And when you look at that number, our capacity is still going to be 12, 14%, whatever that is. I don't know the exact number. And then you go to the housing chapter and you're like, yeah, but if you slice and dice that capacity up more and what you're really trying to accommodate, you're gonna see a whole nother layer of numbers there. It's confusing. We're looking at other counties to see how they're addressing this disconnect between the work that's done that just looks at capacity versus the more finer tuned work that's done to look at housing accommodation or allocation.
I mean, cause I just think it's important to know that the reason we have the capacity, the current capacity that we have, and I believe the state's kind of run in a, so I think the courts kind of said 15 to 25% is your okay range.
For UGAs.
No,
Oh.
for counties.
Oh, okay.
Because when they say this is how many available units you have, that says if you develop everything that can be developed right now. So it doesn't take into account, I mean, the fact that I can point out 3 people. You look at the Thompsons in Nisqually, the Colvins in Tenino, my family, I'll add in the Jensens, Skookumchuck. There's a lot of available units there that aren't gonna get developed.
Cause they're all in conservation easements.
No,
No, aren't most of them?
because I own it.
Well.
Because we're farming it. I mean, Fred Colvins is the only one that's in
No,
that
you're right.
conservation easement.
Oh, I thought the Thompsons had the PDR.
Part of it
Okay.
is, yes, but there's other ones that are not.
And that's another thing we don't have a good handle on, and we are trying to develop a map layer. We have some really great land trusts in Thurston County that have been doing amazing work for decades, and we don't have a good spatial representation of all the land that is conserved, and that is not reflected in your buildable lands analysis. Like, if it's an easement, it's not, it doesn't pop up. So we are also trying to get a handle on like how much of this land that we are saying is in excess capacity actually is already being conserved through one of these other mechanisms that is not a land use tool.
Have you contacted the Nisqually Land Trust?
Yep. I mean, we're working with them, Capital Land Trust, Community Farmland Trust, Washington Farmland Trust. But there's even older stuff out there. And then there's also ownership, CNLM has been buying up prairie land for years. And this is a good thing, but it's not like you have a map and you can go to it and say, oh, wow, like
We need those
30% of this is already in conservation. So we're trying to parse out some of these things so that we get a fuller picture for decision makers.
We do, I'm a member of the Capital Land Trust and on the board, and we do have good maps that show where the conservation easements are.
For Capital Land Trust?
Yes.
Yeah.
The word, go ahead.
Yeah, I do agree that like we need to be able to see that to be able to like, I feel like comprehensively make some of these decisions. So that's great to know that there's some of that that already exists and that you are working actively on that. That was gonna be one of my questions. I had a couple things about UGA, about the Grand Mound UGA specifically, which has sort of been popping up in the presentation. I noticed that in terms of median household income, it has a really strange sort of popcorning effect where it is like the top corner of it is in the 0 to 60,000 income, and then like most of it's in like much higher income levels. It's in like the 140,000, 180,000, or the 80,000. If we're looking at like the figure 4.3 on page 4A. We've got an odd breakdown economically. I wasn't sure if we knew why that was. It also sits entirely within the possible displacement level of risk. And I was wondering in both of those contexts, what its UGA status does to that. Like, how is it being affected by its intended? Because it seems like an area that's going to have a really pretty drastic change in character with the progression of UGA, and I was wondering if we had anything that directly reflected that.
Aneza, have you dug into Grand Mound at all?
Would you mind referring to The page number, it's not on that.
Yeah, sorry, 4.8 works for this. It's the same map is also on 4.12.
Oh, presentation.
I mean, I can answer it as it relates to like when we did the Grand Mountain Sudbury Plan update, and then we're considering, the county's considering 2 applications for UGA expansion, one of which would be for residential. There was a analysis done by our staff to look at like, why isn't Grand Mountain already developing with a mixture of housing types? Because there's a real need for workforce housing. We've been hearing that, especially from the Chehalis tribe. And the land is zoned that, but it's not redeveloping. And so when we took a closer look at it, a lot of the land that has been zoned for a mixture of housing types that would allow for more workforce housing, it's already developed with like a single family home, and the prices are so like, hasn't, redevelopment, the redevelopment value isn't there yet. Maybe it'll be there in the future. There's also a lot of critical areas down there that when we overlaid critical areas, like to Commissioner Nelson's point, with the land that zone, that is like, oh, it'd be really hard to do like an apartment complex or something, you know, on a larger scale. So there is a proposal right now to expand the UGA to actually pull in a larger scale lot that does not have critical areas that would allow for that mixture of housing types.
Like the Womalskis?
Yes.
Commissioner Casino.
To backtrack a little bit about this capacity analysis, I'm getting myself confused, and I'm hoping that you can clear this up. When we're doing this capacity analysis, is that being done on the way our parcels are now, or is it also include 10-acre and larger that could be cut down to 5s?
It's looking at anything. It's the zoning capacity.
So it's the zoning capacity. So is one of the tools that you're thinking about making it more difficult to cut down 10-acre parcels into 5s or 20s into 5s?
That would, with the limited number that's in the RR 1 to 5 zone, that would be an option. So if you currently have a 10-acre parcel and it's zone RRR 15, would you down zone it to RRR 110? You can go even further and basically say that even if you're RRR 15, the minimum acreage you need to develop would be 10. So you'd have to buy 2 of those parcels, or if it's 1 to 20, 4 of those parcels.
So you could do that purely through zoning and before you actually get to subplatting.
I don't know of many counties that have done it.
Right.
It gets really difficult though when you have a legal building lot. I mean, our case law is built around the right to build it at a minimum.
If it's in a parcel, it's a whole different ballgame.
If it's
than
a
just
legal
being in-
building lot. So I would not throw that out as like a
Yeah,
like solid viable idea. It would take a lot of research into case law to see whether that could even be done.
not letting somebody break down a 20 into 4 5s is not nearly as offensive as telling a guy with 2 5s that he can only build 1.
Yeah, and that's the scenario, legal building lot. It is, I think it'd be very difficult, even if there are some provisions, state provisions that would support it. I don't know if case law would support it. We haven't done that research.
Okay. A little bit different question goes back to some of these maps that I've seen a lot, and I want to know a little bit more about the comp plan's interaction with tribes and the tribal lands. And we see this a lot with not just what they say as far as medium incomes go, but also with racial disparities. If we are including tribal lands in our calculations, what it looks like we're doing both with the Chehalis and the Nisquallies, doesn't that kind of throw everything off? Because if you're gonna live on the reservation, the chances that you are anything other than a native is about 0.
Aneza or Anna, do you know how those were taken into consideration?
Well, I know that the Nisqually and the Chehalis have requested to not be included in the comp plan with regards to housing analyses. As far as graphs and stuff on Oneza, I know we talked about this recently. Could you speak to that? I'm blanking on how we decided to proceed.
Yeah, so we use the county-wide data. We didn't specifically call out any title data, but any county-wide data that we received from the census and other data sources. That we have all of the data included.
Oneza, your audio is all garbled.
It's very tinny. If you're speaking into like an air microphone, maybe moving your head closer to your computer, if it's a laptop, might help with.
Yeah, is it working now? I just tested before the
That's
meeting
better.
today. Okay, good. Thank you. I'm sorry about this. So we, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So we looked at, and Anna, we talked about this and we looked at the data. So we excluded any specific references to tribal land. But the data that we have used for county-wide count, those came from census and OFM and other datas. If they have included tribal data, then they might have been included into this count. I don't know if this answers your question.
No. So it sounds like sometimes you use the data and sometimes you don't use the data is kind of what I'm understanding. Am I misunderstanding that?
That's correct, because to parse out the census data and remove that would be just too much of an ask for Burke. So we told them to proceed, but I do agree that it does feel weird.
Yeah.
And if you have recommendations, I'm open to hearing that. I personally want to ensure that we are both respecting the tribes and recognizing their role in this without taking the colonizers' role in this by using data in a way that could be misrepresented.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a real concern about that.
I have a comment related to that too. And I was struggling with looking at the displacement map versus the income map and looking for those tribal lands as well and trying to understand the correlation if there was any between the two. But in the document among communities of interest, we see that we have 2 tribal communities located in Thurston County, Nisqually Indian Tribe and the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation, but the Squaxin Island Tribe also considers Thurston County home. And the point where the Squaxin flag is flying over the Griffin Neighborhood School and Steamboat. I mean, a large part of the population of that school are tribal members. So I'm a little baffled at some of the content here about the tribal neighbors.
I know that I'm not a part of these meetings. I know that we have standing monthly meetings with the tribes and I'm happy to bring this to them again. I know that there's been, they're standing for the sake of so that if folks are able to attend, they can, and if not, but I will make sure to follow up on these so that we, as we approach the public hearing draft. And should you all request a subsequent work session on this chapter, as was already a recommendation from the community, so that we can discuss that then.
I'm hearing that there's a specific ask by Commissioner Kaiser to make sure that the Squaxin Nation specifically is included as a community of interest and impact.
And they, of our 3 tribal partners, they have been the most consistent at meeting with us more than once a month to dive into the chapters. And so they always get the earliest version of the chapter, and the housing chapter is currently being discussed. Meeting was actually supposed to happen this morning and had to be delayed. So yeah, we are definitely engaging with them and trying to respect their feedback while meeting the state's requirements for data analysis.
Does the state require us to have the tribes in our county-wide land capacity and housing income type level needs analysis?
No, it's just the way that data exists. It's hard to just
parse
pull
it out.
out little blocks of it. And so, I mean, those are also questions I could raise to TRPC and like, how do you incorporate it into the buildable lands analysis and things of that nature?
That's a very good question, how you, yeah.
Yes.
I guess my assumption had been a long time that we were not including that in a lot of our data other than as advisory, but if it's going into our calculations too.
I don't know.
That throws everything off.
It's, yeah, basically we have a situation where we have a lot of on-title recognition of nations, but when it comes to their the way that we allocate land and the way that we consider capacity, we basically just treat that as our land in holding. Unfortunately, as a state, I find that to be often the case.
I don't think we do that with the tribal lands at all. We don't consider that land as parcels that are buildable at all. Well, my question is that, does the Squaxin tribe, like the Nisqually tribe, have a housing area designated for the tribe? I didn't know they did, but.
Right, and as I understand it, their reservation lands are in Mason County.
Yeah, okay.
But much of the tribe lives in Thurston, and has lived here for thousands of years. And are very much part of our
Right.
institutions, our schools, our universities, et cetera.
But they don't have a housing development like the Nisqually or.
They don't have, it's not formal, but they have communities and where tribal members live.
And I think that's why it's really important to be proactive about it, engaging those communities as what they functionally are, rather than what they are titled as. That is functionally and historically tribal land, even if it's not within the protections that are afforded by the state.
No, it's not designated tribal land. That's the point.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I think.
Well, actually, there are actually on Steamboat Peninsula, tribal held parcels. For example, if you're driving down 101 toward Shelton, you can see a tribal gas station.
Right.
And that is in Thurston County, and it is tribal land.
Right.
And perhaps with some kind of, there's probably a long story about that, but there are other parcels within Thurston County, especially on Steamboat, that have the same status.
Well, when they buy property as a tribe, they can designate it as tribal property. Once it's
Put
closed.
it on the rolls.
Yeah.
Takes them a couple years to get it. There's a
Yeah.
process for it, but
Yeah.
it goes into trust.
I do know though, that those folks who are living in those areas have been there for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So it's ambiguous.
Well, we can at least ask the question.
Yeah.
Sorry, Onessa.
Presentation already, and there's a couple of last slides, and these are the upcoming information so you will be hearing more about this adequate provisions. And this is more of like what needs to be done for at the county's end to provide housing. Department of Commerce, they provide checklists, so our team is now working and going through the checklist with county staff. And then we are identifying gaps and barriers. We're looking at potential development regulations. And then also reviewing roles of accessory dwelling units. So those will be coming. Some of those are already in the draft chapter. And we have tagged the areas that will need more information, or that will have more information. And the last slide about goals and policies that you already have reviewed. So this goals and policies are there. If there are additional review, you can let us know and we could update those. And at the end, as part of the next step, you will see the final version of the housing chapter. You will also see the development regulations that will be coming up in the next meeting. Not the next, but in October, I believe. And then we are also working on the EIS document, and that's where we will be analyzing into more detail the sustainable Thurston and the no action alternatives. So you will be reviewing those as well. And that's all.
Thank you, Vanessa. More questions and comments?
So, we have a section in this draft specifically on manufactured homes. And I remember the first time we talked about this, we asked Burke, or perhaps it was one of Burke's subcontractors, where they were getting their housing affordability data, and the answer was that we were getting it from Zillow, since it was an open database. I have a lot of concern with language we have in there about maintaining and protecting our mobile home communities as affordable housing. Zillow's cost estimates for those homes does not take into consideration lot rent. And as someone who has friends who and family members who live in mobile home communities, the last few years, lot rent has gotten worse than renting an apartment. You might be able to buy $150,000 50-year-old mobile home, and you will be paying $1,600 a month just to be on that land, and that is going to increase every year. That isn't affordable housing. That's not affordable housing to 80% of median household income. And the trend just keeps going up. So if this is a plan for, you know, a decade plus in the future, protecting those, like, I don't know what that means, because it says we need to, if you go to page 411, it says the manufactured home communities in rural Thurston County. It says, many of these homes in these communities may provide quality housing at price points that are more affordable than site-built housing that is similarly located and sized. It says, if you have any affordable options if they wish to relocate, preserving existing manufactured home parks and allowing new manufactured home parks will support housing affordability in the county. And I disagree with that last sentence. I don't think it improves housing affordability.
Yeah, that may in there is doing so much work.
It's doing a lot of heavy lifting. That last sentence is, it's not connected with reality because the data that they're using doesn't incorporate what are truly excessive lot rents. I mean, I've seen homes, $75,000 homes that have had no improvement in 50+ years that are charging near $2,000 for lot rent. So someone is purchasing a home that is not move-in ready because it has serious problems and are stuck paying an ever-moving amount of lot rent. That's not affordable housing. And if we're gonna call it part of our affordable housing plan, then we as a county, as someone who I think licenses mobile home communities, right, should be using whatever levers of power we have to effectually to keep that affordable or hedge our bets a little bit.
A lot of it's actually set by the state. So
That's
even
unfortunate.
increases in lot rent, my parents live in one, and so I do hear about the increases in
It's
lot rent. They're
incredibly
based-
frustrating
They're capped each year, but what the companies are doing is they're maxing out.
every single year. And
And so cumulatively, if you're there a long time on a fixed income, it has big repercussions, but we would have to look into what powers we have within state law to further.
Additionally,
Cap it.
some of the most affordable of those houses are in 55+ communities. So buying the house is a euphemism for, you know, a 15-year, 20-year rental in their mind. It's not really buying a home.
Sorry.
Vice Chair, continuing on with those thoughts, I share similar concerns. I was shocked to see the volume. We talk about 81 units of mobile home parks in the county, 81 parks. I don't know the average number of units per park. I'm guessing in the 30 to 40 range. If it was 30, that would be 2,400 units in parks. It says in the unincorporated county, there are, this is now table 4.4 on page 410.
It's actually on page 413 for the table.
That's a different one than I'm referencing.
It's called, I think it's table 4.5, but it breaks down the affordability level of mobile homes, I think.
I guess I'm simply trying to point out that I'm shocked that, you know, and it says this in the earlier section that those 81 parks don't represent the majority, that the vast majority are single mobile homes on lots. Now, there's a difference obviously with the lot rentals, right? The land rentals. But to say that 10,851 in the unincorporated county, if we took out, if there's 2,400 in the 81 parks, that's only 23%, 22% of that. So 78% are closer to single units on land they own. That's a shockingly high volume to me that we have in the county if it's that many. I'm also shocked that we have more single family homes in the county than we have in the cities combined. I didn't realize we have that many homes in the county.
It's a big land area.
And
the population.
But I'm still following along with Commissioner Baumgartner's comments about because he's right that we're referencing this very loosely as a great opportunity for affordable housing. And it gets even more questionable on page 4-22, where it talks about the differences in the prices for units, and it references, again, Burke collected Zillow data, and it talks about, I'm referencing footnote 21 at the bottom of the page there. It says, this is only with homes sold, this is all manufactured homes in Thurston County built after 2014. Included only homes sold with the land and excluded units in manufactured home communities or mobile home parks. But then they say the average asking price, 311,000, with a range from 190 to 388. These prices are potentially affordable to a moderate income household based on current mortgage rates and access to a modest down payment. Okay, that phrase, that last sentence, is not remotely true for $311,000 home. It might be true for the absolute least expensive 190,000, but nowhere above that on that spectrum. So to act like that entire range is affordable to moderate income is very misleading, in my opinion.
Oh, Neza, do you have any feedback on that? I know Kevin does a lot of the number work and he's ill tonight and can't be with us.
Yeah, we can definitely look into this into more detail and then get back to you on that.
I just want to add, I don't think mobile manufactured home and housing is bad. I think celebrating mobile home parks as affordable is misleading at best and actively harmful at worst.
I think it gets to a issue that we've run into a few times here where there will be a housing type that is itself potentially affordable. And we use that housing type or that development type as a proxy for we have now designated an area as affordable or designated a process as affordable. Without doing these necessary metrics and homework that Commissioner Bloomberg is talking about, of making sure that like actually narrowly defining the types that we are encouraging as the affordable version of the thing that is potentially affordable otherwise, because otherwise these are loopholes to me. They're just labels that you can add to say that you're building affordable style housing, which then becomes like all natural. You know, it just becomes a phrase that gets used without actually meaning anything. I did have a question that's tangentially related, that's more about the homelessness side of it, but if we wanted to continue on the second hold on.
Just one tiny thing.
You want to go first here?
I just wanted to keep it on our mind that $311,000 might not feel affordable, but in the relative housing market of Thurston County with a mean home price of over 500, 311 would be what we would be looking at affordable, even if it doesn't feel that way. So unless we start finding stuff that is free or a lot less than 311 or even 190, affordable is kind of a subjective term or relative term, but nobody's building houses on 5-acre parcels in the county that are less than 311,000 or 190,000. So the rent's too high, but it's not getting any cheaper. So I'd love to see some tools on getting stuff cheaper, so it does feel more affordable, but I don't know what the county can do. If mobile homes are the cheapest thing that we are able to do, I don't want to vilify them either.
Real quick, to Commissioner Bartlett's point about how we build a thing, I know there's focus on ADUs as well. And ADUs for housing is great, but what I see a lot of in Olympia proper, which is not us, is building ADUs as short-term rentals, which doesn't help our housing supply. It just makes it more expensive to live here. And so we should be deliberate and careful when we put ADUs forward, again, detailing how we intend for them to be used.
So I have followed up on 2 items related to that. In terms of the ADUs, I asked our economic development manager here who we get lodging tax for all Airbnb and VRBO type things. And so I asked how many of those are actually located in rural county to try to understand those trends, at least now. It's a blip, if anything, in rural county. That's not to say as we have more of them, you know, that we won't see more lodging tax of those, but there is at least a mechanism for assessing what that trend looks like. And secondly, had a meeting with a number of the developers here in the county, actually talking about housing and chatted with them about, you know, what kind of demand are they seeing for detached accessory dwelling units? And they're like, that's all we get phone calls for nowadays. They're pretty emphatic about that. I told them to show up tonight. They didn't, but I will carry some of that messaging. So then I asked why, like who's asking them and why do they want to build them? And they said overwhelmingly it's for aging parents or kids leaving college and coming home. That it is so expensive to go and buy their own house that they're being asked whether it's possible to build a detached accessory dwelling unit to accommodate those two brackets. So it's, you know, qualitative feedback, but I wanted you to know that trying to ask folks that are actually on the ground building these things or being asked to build these things, what they're hearing.
Did anyone see the article in the Olympian about a
Population
month
growth?
and a half, 2 months ago about what?
This is the one about population growth?
No, about Homes First. The nonprofit that's trying to help people get into housing, and they said that they had built an ADU on an existing property, no land cost. And they were describing the cost of construction and fees and everything they had to do. I think it was small, like 1,000 or 1,200 square feet, something like that. And they said their cost of construction, their total cost to build it was $550,000.
How much of that was filing fees and stuff like that?
I mean, is that for real? Does it cost us $550,000 to build an ADU here? Right
My
now?
understanding in talking to our jurisdictional partners, because we're all struggling with this, is I think it was the city of Lacey, Vanessa Dolby, their new planning director, went around and was trying to figure out of the costs of these things, how much of it is in permits and how much of it is in utility extensions and at least as they were looking at it, and we should do the same thing here, is utilities are a big one, utility extensions, depending on if you need another lateral, that's gonna be expensive. Out in the rural area, if you need to put in a new septic system, that is gonna ratchet up your price considerably versus, oh, you have an oversized septic system, you can just focus on building the unit. So I think it's variable depending on the site. They did not find that it was the permit fees there. Don't know if that's the same case here, but I think there should be a commitment from all of us in the region to just take a look at those price breakdowns to figure out what they are so that we can help affordable housing providers upfront understand where those costs are gonna be and any barriers that might exist. But it's a lot. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but it's a lot.
Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I share that concern. I think that this does get to the idea that came up during public comment about making sure that we have more publicly owned and publicly subsidized housing as part of the answer for low income housing. That I think you're absolutely right. Commissioner Casino is absolutely right that we are not going to be able to get this through relative affordability. Relative affordability isn't going to lead to absolute affordability because of the price breakdowns that we're dealing with here. Because of the way that the market is here, the market solution is not necessarily going to work. So I think that the suggestions that Loretta Sepinen brought in about doing regional housing allocations, bringing in sort of more like public partnerships in terms of how we structure these things, and doing a little bit more public work is probably one of the main answers here. My question from before, and I think that's related to this, is I saw that we had 6,000 households in unincorporated Thurston County were spending over half of their income in household costs. I also saw we had 12,500 individuals who are experiencing homelessness or unstable housing. That's an astounding and terrible number. You know what that means in terms of, I know how hard it is to, I've done homeless counts a number of times. I know how hard it is to get people to show up. I know how hard it is to count folks. So the actual numbers that implies to me are staggering. Because it will be multiple times more than that. That said, the 6,000 households versus 12,500 individuals who are actually houseless, 6,000 households who are experiencing income instability. I know that's just unincorporated Thurston County, but that still almost seems low to me. I was wondering about those numbers, and like that relative disparity seemed odd to me.
No, I agree. I mean, I think one of the things, and I'll preface this with my experience with housing and homelessness is tied to the South. So very different dynamics there from here in Washington, is like HUD definitions of homelessness and housing instability versus like individual and how they would identify their situation. I think there's an argument to be made for folks who live in RVs and in dilapidated mobile homes, which is why there's a need for preservation of those units, could be grouped into that. And I am not certain they are. I would need to double check that. But I agree that the numbers are low. I think it's better and would be beneficial if in this chapter we more explicitly outlined how, especially post-pandemic and post-eviction moratoriums, more people lost their jobs, more people lost their homes, and that any number and any data we use is going to be, I would argue, inadequate. But we're trying our best to reference it and just say, like, we recognize that the data is not the best and it's inaccurate, but we're trying to do these things moving forward. I welcome any and all recommendations on how you think we could do that. I feel like I'm approaching this chapter from the perspective of that it's not going to be perfect, and I'd argue it's going to be really far from what we all want it to be, but whatever we can do policy wise, the narrative is important, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, there's going to be a technical appendix for this chapter specifically, and I think also for climate. Burke gave us a 90-page draft, and we said, sorry, please try and cut it down so that the chapter itself is shorter and more narrative that's tied to the data is in the technical appendix. However, that will be part of the public hearing draft. That the more we can do, like, it's not gonna be perfect. The narrative isn't gonna be perfect either. I really want the policies to set us up so that in the next 20 years, we can fall back on this and say, okay, the data might not be the best because it's not available. 2 years to do this is not long enough. And just staff resources, any policies and any goals and objectives that really clearly outline that. Don't cancel out the fact that this chapter in this element is going to be far from perfect, but I think can show ourselves that we tried and the community that we tried, so that at least in 10, 15 years, we can say, we at least have this objective, even if these other things we disagree with.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, this data is up to 2020, right? Most of the housing data, because it's ACS data. And a lot of cost explosion, particularly in housing, happened in the last 3 years. I understand that we can't get an accurate survey for that. And we put in sentences stating, hey, costs have exploded, so this is probably, we know this is wrong, right? I think a step further we could do is maybe set forward an estimated growth percent, whether that's some sort of consumer price index number or something like that, and say, assuming our prices, keep your sentence about, hey, this is inaccurate, but then say, based on a 15% cost increase from the consumer price index from the last 3 years, this is what that number would be. So we're at least putting it in something closer to the context. It's not gonna be right, but it's at least closer. And we're not saying, let's not use that data. We're presenting the 2020 data that's verified and then giving context with real numbers, not just, it's not great, which is still better than just going with the 2020 numbers, but we're planning around this. It feels really weird planning for 4 years ago's economy.
We can direct Bert to do so.
Yeah, thanks.
I think that's kind of the problem we're gonna run into here is because you talk about mobile home communities.
Mhm.
For what, 50 years?
Oh,
They've
yeah.
been pretty affordable.
Super cheap.
So we can't base them not being affordable anymore on a 3-year or 4-year anomaly. We have to look at this as 20 years out, and obviously we don't know what's gonna change. So I mean, and I can remember, I don't remember when it was, but maybe late 2000s, early 2010s, there was a push in Thurston County, specifically a couple cities, to do away with the mobile home parks because they didn't like them. And that was, the argument was, well, people would come to our meetings and be like, I can't afford a house. I live in this mobile home park. And so I think that's where we have to kind of figure out and balance this idea of what do we have history of? What do we know now? And and then the hard part, what's gonna happen in the future? Because I mean, maybe 10 years from now, it's back to, oh man, I sure wish we had some mobile home parks that people could move into.
I could respond. So the largest driver of increased costs for mobile home parks is not actually increasing costs. There's been over the last 10 years, a massive transfer of ownership of mobile home parks from family ownership, small entrepreneurs to private capital. BlackRock and its buddies own huge amounts of these, and they're literally buying them, jacking up the rents, and just collecting the money. And I don't think, you can show me any person in private capital who will willingly reduce the amount of money they're making off of vulnerable people. I'll write you a check for $1,000 right now, like, it's not happening. And so to assume that this massive inflation and greed by people who see these as assets, not as people's homes. We can't cross our fingers and hope that we're gonna go back to 10, 15, 20 years ago's mobile home parks. It's not realistic.
Well, but you can say the same thing about their taxes. I mean, a lot of that increase is because it costs more to own now.
It does cost
Anybody in
more.
here
They
that
didn't
owns land knows what the county's done in the last 5 years to your taxes.
It's not five-folding though.
It's just this year.
Yeah.
Really,
I think we just heard that somebody's taxes went up 42%.
Oh,
That's not five-folding
I
though.
didn't say their taxes. They said their assessment.
assessed
Their
value.
investment, but
Assessed value, yes.
I don't think any of that's actionable in our comp plan, though. We're not gonna be able to delineate who gets to own real estate and who gets to be a landlord. I think that these mobile home communities have always been capitalistic adventures. And just because there might be global players instead of local players doesn't mean that the county can come in and say,
One thing I know Regional Housing Council is doing though, and I think there are provisions in the comp plan, is encouraging cooperative buying of them, because there is a Washington-based organization.
I'm not advocating abolishing these. I'm saying that we as a county have, this might sound weird, a moral responsibility to make sure that the people living in our counties in these places can afford to live in them, right? That it maintains its affordability. And there's an ethical and affordable way to actually do that, that isn't just see them exploited until they end up destitute.
what's the tool for that? How does the county, a carrot or a whip, which one? And
I think the answer is both.
I'd love to see what they look like.
To your request in this book, St. George, Utah has a policy where the property taxes there's what's called a resident exemption. And it is 55% of the assessed value. It's basically a 45% discount.
Our problem is that our taxes are based on what the state says, not on what the county says. County code is not going to change, would not be able to effectuate something like that. We couldn't even do a land value tax if we wanted to, which I would be a proponent for, but it's state law that sets all that. Nothing in the comp
Well, I
plan's gonna do
appreciate
that.
your challenges to my assertion. I would ask all of us to practice a little decorum of directing our comments to the chair and not challenging each other incorrectly. I guess I would ask, what can we do to implement policies for different property taxes or exemptions or whatever capacity we have that are within our capacity?
Commissioner Halverson.
Washington State, as most of you probably already know, has an exemption for senior and disabled. And it's a very significant 95% disabled reduction in property taxes and all fees and assessments for the most part. The thing that they might be able to do is change that based on income level for other than seniors and disabled. That would be one thing they could do, and there would be a lot of pushback on that, I understand that, but that would be one thing that they could do by whack.
I like that idea. I think that that would be one route to go with it. I also do want to encourage, as Commissioner Blumberger said, and Commissioner Kissinger also said, the idea of cooperatization, and the idea of looking at, I feel like almost everything that we've been looking at here are these specific, like, developer-based, like sort of profit-based systems, and it's clear that we're running into a lot of ceilings on what's possible with that. So I would like to look at a lot more public housing and what we would look at with public housing and then cooperative housing. And I think, like, specifically having a set of policies that look at what cooperative ownership for things like these mobile homes especially, but other types of like multi-resident housing.
The Northwest Co-op Development Center here in
Yes.
Olympia has done this with mobile home parks. There may be a resource.
Yeah. Thank you very much for bringing up what I was about to say, which is actually the NWCDC has been enormously helpful in this. They are currently about to run out of, they're in Olympia, which is no longer considered a rural area. So they're about to have some challenges in terms of being able to help folks. But they are an incredibly valuable resource, and I would recommend reaching out to them in terms of experience. I might recommend that they do the same to us.
When I was more familiar with the work they were doing this all over the state.
Yeah.
Of the office here in Olympia.
I actually knew a person that was, doing the cooperative agreements. And this is where we're trying not to duplicate too much things that are in plans that the Regional Housing Council is developing. So in parallel with us doing our comprehensive plan update, they're doing, what is the name of their plan update?
Housing action plan?
So they have housing action plans, and then they have like another one for, it's like, it'd be a homeless prevention plan. I forget the exact name, but we've been coordinating with them to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, but that we're making sure that whatever we do helps support their efforts instead of basically just lifting up everything they have and dropping it in here.
I guess I would appreciate then, knowing that, I really do appreciate that that's going on, because that's something I didn't know was happening. And so I've been trying to include in our conversation a lot of things that maybe are more relevant to that. It would be useful to know where we are skipping that stuff over because it's being referenced within their plans. And that this may be an issue that is being more addressed, especially because we're talking about the same problem being resolved in two very different ways. So that would relieve some of our burden in conversations and meetings if we know that that's being dealt with elsewhere.
We've also had conversations with our counterparts over at Regional Housing Council about whether they'd be willing to come to a planning commission meeting once we got really into the housing chapter. And so we could ask them if that's a possibility. You know, if we have a certain number of questions related to, because they are doing so much of the work in terms of trying to get affordable housing to come to the area. And yeah, even if it's not relevant to the comp plan, they're just an amazing resource.
Great. I'm gonna go to Commissioner Baumgartner, but just a quick time check. We have 15 minutes on this topic on the agenda.
I would just say, I feel like the plan could do, if that is the case, the plan could do a better job to hang a lantern where we say we'd work with them, but we don't say on what or how we can say with these sorts of initiatives and support from other partners, a lot of the comments we got from the public today was about emphasizing partnerships. And that it addresses multiple concerns from the public and the commission if we can point out the things and our role as the county in making their job easier and reducing barriers to that work.
I'm new, so sorry. I'm new in that I started 11 months ago, new. But I would argue in the past that we really have not had much collaboration with public health and social services. So that's been something I've been trying to do is keep in touch with them as we do things. I've been able to be a fly on the wall, listening to the lived experience housing steering committee and hear their concerns. So far, we've not talked about comp plan because they have many other things going on with the different plans that Commerce requires of that team. This draft, as well as the policies you all saw before, were shared with PHSS. Although they are very busy, so I did not expect nor request they have feedback for this meeting. But that's just so that the planning commission is aware that's something that has been a concerted effort on my part, is trying to break down silos between us and PHSS, since they are the actual experts. We are not the housing experts. I can say I have experience with everything. I don't know the county, I don't know housing, and I'm not gonna claim to. So the more that we can engage them in this, and I appreciate your feedback on more clearly stating it in the plan, and I've made a note to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Pessinger.
I have some questions. One, you mentioned Ashley about the numbers, the short-term rentals was a very small number. I still want to learn what that number is and whatever we know about it across the whole county, not just the unincorporated. Second, I think it should be included in the document itself. I think it's going to end up impacting things related to housing.
Just, I will check into it. Danica is on an extended vacation, so it might not be in time for the next meeting. See.
Sorry, I forgot the other question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to bring up your thought.
When I remember it.
Well, we'll come back to the topic with another meeting. So I think we're gonna gain a couple minutes here on the agenda.
Say one thing.
Yes, please.
I know this is confusing and complicated, and there is no one size fits all solution. So I just, if any of you have questions, you can email me directly. Don't feel like you need to go to the Thurston Planning email. I'm happy to do whatever I need to do to get answers from Burke or other folks here at the county if you have questions.
Did you remember it?
I did, thank
Okay.
you. I don't know why I forgot this. This is kind of major. We had no less than 3 of the public comments today, specifically mentioning
5% goal.
Yeah. We made a motion, we passed that. I don't understand why it's not in here. Why is everyone acting as if we've never even talked about it?
That's not the case. I think it was waiting to get the final land capacity analysis numbers and have that be reflected. So there's the 5%, but if it's 2% in the allocation, I think you're gonna end up seeing a more complex policy around here's what's being allocated in these income brackets. And then overall, even if that number is 1.2% or whatever it ends up being overall, there is a desire to try to encourage as much of the new housing to locate within urban areas. We
Well,
have
I-
heard from our jurisdictional partners, just so you know, that they're trying to move away from using Sustainable Thurston in their comp plans, because for them, it comes with very specific changes, land use changes. And some of the cities weren't able to implement all of the specific Sustainable Thurston land use changes. Like Tumwater, for instance, Sustainable Thurston didn't take into consideration HCP or airport overlay. And so a lot of the things that were identified, it's like they couldn't do, but they did other things instead. And so there's just a concern about continuing to use a term that is reflective of analysis that was done over 10 years ago, rather than just stating the intention of no more than 5% and having it based on new analysis. And I can say with fresh eyes looking at Sustainable Thurston, there is a lot of flawed analysis in there, just given the data that was available. And so I don't know, the intentions are good, but using that is the document that we're tying all of our policies to, as it pertains to rural stuff, we've got a lot more current data.
Is it, I mean, I think the issue with sustainable Thurston, though, the reason we use it is because of the degree of rigor of protection, establishing a baseline. So do we have anything that would be a better, equally or more rigorous baseline that we could be using for comparison?
When you say, what do you mean in terms of baseline?
So sustainable Thurston, the reason that we reference that is because it establishes like, okay, here are some minimums in terms of protection, of degrees of protection, of degrees of like making sure that we hit these targeted goals of carbon reduction or environmental protection or watershed protection. So do we have anything that is at least that rigorous in terms of holding to at least that amount of reduction or protection that we could be using as a baseline that isn't sustainable Thurston if sustainable Thurston is outdated?
They would live in lots of different places. So I would say yes. I mean, when I went through it, I didn't see anything that isn't already reflected in a lot of the other documents. Now, whether we're hitting the targets, that is completely questionable. And can we use that as a reference piece to see whether there are different things we can do to hit the targets? But there isn't a lot of substance in there when you look at how it reflects the county. They basically said we don't have reliable inventories for forest lands or ag lands. And so it instructed the county to do that. And now we do have way more precise data. And it had a number of directives for the cities, and they have carried out as much as possible or variants as possible. But their city, city of Tumwater especially is like, we couldn't do certain things. And so does that mean that we're not carrying out sustainable Thurston? It's like, well, we're meeting the intention, like we're seeing that we can accommodate these housing types. So I don't know, I'm just being transparent here, and that term for some people can be a lightning rod. It was not globally received with open arms, is what I have heard as a new person coming to this table. And so I would rather just stick with numbers instead of plans from 11 plus years ago. Well, yeah, 11 plus years ago.
Casino, can you bring us home?
Hopefully. When you talk to our jurisdictional partners and you have relayed to them that we did not want to take on 12% of housing capacity, that we want to take on 5% or less, or maybe 2% or less of 0 to 120% AMI, how are they taking that news?
They've been great. I mean, it has been a really amazing educational opportunity to sit in a room and talk about how certain housing types just cannot be accommodated in rural areas. Like, no question, like they just can't. Even if we wanted to as a community, which I think we do, we want to provide more affordable housing, and we can't under state law. So I think it's been a great educational opportunity, and acknowledging that in a public forum that they have. Yeah, it's been well received, and they've been very collaborative. There were thousands of units that they are now having to accommodate.
Yeah. So they're not running to Commerce and saying the county is being mean to us, making us take on more than we should.
Nope. And the amazing thing is that they have made enough moves in those last 10 years that they can accommodate in the urban areas, and they wouldn't have been able to in 2013. And I think they should get credit for that. Whether the market is following it, zoning and land use isn't the barrier. At this point, it's a market, and there's excess capacity in the county. And so if we really want to limit it to 5% in the county, then it's a tough decision for the county to make about excess capacity. But the cities have done what they were asked to do.
Okay, great. That's good news.
Is good news, but that's not reflective if we just say do sustainable. So it makes it sound like the cities haven't done anything, and they have done a lot. But that what they did nothing to our excess capacity. So
Okay.
those are tough choices.
Oh,
I know you
you gonna
want to
sneak
bring
one
it
in
home.
under the
This is
under
just
the
tying
gun?
into what
Okay.
we're just saying. So and this is just a question from maybe somebody who doesn't know how things work. With our partners, like you said, jurisdictional partners. I know when we do joint planning, that there's a process and that we don't tell them what to do. We work together on things, but is it appropriate for the comp plan to have anything about what we would like to have happen in UGAs? Is that the appropriate place for it? To go in the comp plan, this is what, for UGA areas, this is our ideal scenario.
The way our MOUs with the cities work is that the joint plans would be the location that, and we do it collaboratively. We are pretty much the only county in the state that does it this way, but it's through the joint planning process.
So you're saying that shouldn't go in the comp plan?
I don't know it basically would be an intention for the county as we enter our joint planning process. And wanting to make sure it doesn't undermine the agreements that we have in place.
Yeah.
Is how it would, I'm just externally processing here, how it would be written or framed for the planning commission to think about.
Seems reasonable.
There is, just so you're aware, there's a lot in the MOUs. They're very detailed. And as a planner, it's pretty amazing. What it has set up is a framework where we collaborate on a lot of things, like our climate mitigation plan as a sustainable Thurston. Those things don't necessarily happen in other counties where you don't have this collaborative approach.
Be careful giving Andy Ryder credit. He will cash that check.
Want to give credit where credit's due.
Next on our agenda is General Thurston 2045 update from Director Arai.
Interim. Yeah, I mean, we're still cruising. We do have a draft of the transportation chapter that we're looking at. We're not sure if it's going to be like polished and complete, so we're going to split that into two conversations. So the first one will be about covering all the different changes that have happened in state law, some of which I think will be interesting to you, especially around multimodal corridor analysis, and then ask some key questions that will help guide sort of the finishing up of that chapter. So you have that coming up. The implementation plan and the technical appendices, I think you're going to have a lot of interest in, as well as the public. So we are working on those now to try to get them ready for public consumption. And yeah, I think that's it. And of course, we've got the environmental review underway. It's a lot of work and we're trying to just keep up.
Staff update.
So we now have openings for two positions that have gone live. So we've got an operations manager position open. That's Jeremy Davis's current position. He'll be retiring here at the beginning of October. If you want to catch him, you better call him and figure out what days he's in this next month. And then just yesterday, we posted our natural resources program manager position. This is so exciting. This is a new position for the department, or a newly envisioned position for the department, that will be focused specifically on our land conservation efforts. So think habitat conservation program, farm and forest land conservation program. So we'll actually have just a dedicated person to oversee those efforts. So if you know of anyone, please send them our way. And yeah.
Would part of their job be to collect the data from the land trusts and get it into our GIS system?
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of little pieces that are spread throughout the department. We're really hoping to consolidate that and also have them work with the development services department. Where, even in the case where someone is looking to develop a piece of land, there's conservation opportunity. And if we're not at the table sort of bringing that up, like there's value here, conservation value, it might not happen. And so it'll be a position reporting to me, and then working both with development services and community planning on those conservation efforts. So.
Okay, next on our agenda, calendar with tentative agenda items. September 18th, we have work session number 22 on the plan, transportation and climate elements. and a public hearing and work session number 2 on the capital improvement program. Do we believe that we'll have a quorum?
I should be here.
Okay, terrific. And then on October 2nd, work session number 23, transportation element, and then a public hearing on the Martin Way land use and rezone amendment. Do you think that they won't be available? Okay, so we'll have quorum.
And just really quick on that one, notices went out, so people got an early notification. We made sure to send it both to the owners of property as well as residents, because there were quite a few multifamily apartment complexes around there. And Lacey Planning Commission did hold a work session on this, and Andrew Bond attended, so he'll be able to bring that feedback to you as well.
Anything for the good of the order?
Do you know if we will see Nisqually sub-area plan come back before the end of the year?
Probably not. So Brian's working on putting together sort of stakeholder workshops right now with different interested community members. And I know he's been working closely with the Nisqually River Council. It'll probably be a smaller update, like we're not hearing that folks want to make a lot of big changes. Like they're really happy with that plan. And so we're trying to, you know, hear them and not just update it for the sake of updating it, but do more fine tuning.
Great. Anyone else for the good of the order?
Yeah, I've got one.
Okay.
Most of you guys probably don't know him, but Mark Hancock, who used to come to a lot of meetings, recently passed away. Really interesting guy, drove down from Seattle to come to our meetings. For those of you that are familiar with the wave, he was in that class. That was where that experiment was done in, I think it's Palo Alto. So yeah, I bring it up because I just got the email today. So, and I'll point out while he was here, he was a good friend of mine, so.
I'm sorry.
Very briefly, Hispanic Roundtable is partnering with a group called Thurston Community Media, who some of you may know. They put on a concert series. It's called Studio A Concerts at their Studio A. And on September 21st, we're co-sponsoring a performance of Correo Aéreo, it's airmail, a small 3-person band. And some of the proceeds from sales at the event will benefit a Latinx youth summit that the Hispanic Roundtable sponsors. So if you're looking for something fun to do on September 21st, it's a Saturday night, grab a date, head down to Studio A.
Where's the studio?
I'm sorry,
Where about the studio?
remember, but I can find it real quick. It's in Olympia.
All right. Anybody else going once, going twice? I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Adjourned.
Good job. Job, Joe. Hands.
Yeah. We got 17 minutes back of the